Testing, testing.
Good morning. Welcome to the Maryland Public Service Commission. Before we go on the record this morning, I turn to my colleague, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Just an informal thing, Mr. Chairman. A couple weeks ago, I gave a shout out to my baseball team, and they didn't prevail. But I did want to say that a few people have said to me over the last several days, sorry about your luck, sorry about your team. I got to tell you, I'm proud of my team, and they went to Game 6 of the World Series. That doesn't happen very often in the city of brotherly love, so I'm proud and pleased. I just want to say that.
We do not have a court reporter with us today, but we are on the record, and a meeting transcript will be created. Good morning. This is PC 57 with respect to the impacts of COVID-19 on Maryland's gas and electricity utility operations and customer experiences. Pursuant to order number 90333 issued on August 25th, 2022, the Commission made several rulings with respect to the COVID measures that were implemented back in August of 2020. I think we all remember those dark days very well. In that order, the Commission also requested that the utilities provide additional information to us to support some of their requests. And we received not only the utilities data responses, but we also received comments from Office of People's Counsel as well as the Commission staff. Today we'll be hearing from all of the parties, starting with the utilities. I would ask that you not read to us the filings that you submitted. We've reviewed them thoroughly. This will be the opportunity to provide any additional points as you attempt to convince the Commission to either retain or rescind some of the COVID protection measures that were put in place now more than 2 years ago. Since we are making a transcript of today's proceeding, I would ask that you enter an appearance the first time you speak. We will begin today by hearing from 5 of our largest utilities. I have an agenda in front of me, and we'll begin the discussions with Mr. David Ralph, General Counsel at Baltimore Gas and Electric.
Good morning, Chairman Stanek, members of the Commission. David Ralph on behalf of Baltimore Gas and Electric, and I have here with me Denise Columbos, who's our Senior Vice President of Customer Operations, and John Frayne, who's the Director of Regulatory Strategy and Revenue Policy. Just for the record, Chairman, I would like to correct the record just that we're here for PC 53, and just so we're clear, I think you indicated 57, so I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you for...
Even though that's an important proceeding that...
I have the innovation docket on my mind.
Thanks for doing my dirty work.
So, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And that's exactly what this Commission did back in 2020 to address the impacts of the COVID pandemic on the Maryland economy and our customers. However, today, we are no longer in a state of emergency, and the Maryland economy has recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So it is with this in mind that we have filed, requesting that the Commission return to the well-reasoned provisions of COMAR and the pre-COVID policies so that we can address these arising arrears. What we know is that the meaningful measures that the Commission made back in 2020, while necessary under the emergency conditions that we were in, are now starting to have a negative impact on customer behavior, which will ultimately impact all customers. I want to thank staff for their thorough analysis of the data that was provided by the utilities. And we concur with staff with regard to motion order number 3 and motion order number 4, those having to do with payment arrangements and down payments. With regard to motion number 2, the 30-day notice period, staff took the position that took a more kind of split the baby. You know, we had asked for it to go back to the COMAR 14 days, and staff took the position that 30 days was certainly better than the 45-day modification to COMAR. You know, there are two competing data points at issue. Both of those demonstrate that this should go back to the 14-day COMAR provision. On the one hand, the Maryland economy has rebounded to pre-pandemic levels, and then on the other hand, arrearages have been rising to pandemic levels. Why is that? Why, on the one hand, is the economy healthy and arrearages rising? Well, we came to this commission at the outset of the PC 53 proceedings. The utilities and OHEP both testified that there is a direct correlation between turnoff notices and arrearages. And we believe that has been borne out in the data here before you. Whether it is 45 days or 35 or 30 days, neither of those address the problem. 30 days or 45 days, arrearages will be pushed into the next billing cycle. The well-reasoned provisions of COMAR were thought out. It's not arbitrary that 14 days were picked for COMAR. That's because we know that when customers get a notice with a short period of time, they react quickly and seek help. And we've testified to this at the outset of these proceedings, as did OHEP, that anecdotally we have received calls from customers who say, I've received a notice, I'm calling to find out what I can do about it. We also know that there's a lot of money out there for state benefits that customers are not even applying for. And we believe, as the data clearly shows, that there is a correlation between the notice time and time in which customers act. By pushing it out 30 days, 45 days, you're pushing this arrearage issue into another billing cycle, which compounds the problem, and it may compound it to the point where state assistance is not even enough to mitigate that growing problem. Now, no utility, let me be clear about this, no utility wants to be quick about terminating customers. This isn't about termination. It's about notice that we know causes customers to act to seek assistance. And that is what we're asking for here. To return to the well-reasoned provisions of COMAR so that we can help address this arising issue that will help benefit all customers. At this point, I'm going to turn to Denise Galambos and for any further points on motion order number 2.
Good morning, Commissioners and Chairman Stanek. I am the head of our customer operations, and I want to sort of give some color to what David is saying about how it encourages customers to seek assistance.
And can you just spell your name for the record?
Sure. Galambos. Galambos. The first way that it encourages customers to seek assistance is on the notices themselves. The written notices provide information on how to obtain assistance, both the reminder notice, the turnoff notice, and then there are automatic dialers that go out that include information about how to seek assistance. And in June, actually, one of our door hangers we changed to make bilingual. So we have a Spanish door hanger that also gives information on how to provide assistance. It's both in English and Spanish. The second way that customers, how the notice helps customers and what we're seeing in terms of behavior is that the notice encourages you to either call BGE or go on our website. At the end of September, we launched an assistance finder application on our website. Just September, we've had over 5,000 customers that have gone onto the website and been matched with assistance. It's you go in, you can put in some information about your income and your dependents, and it will automatically connect you to all forms of available assistance. It provides a guided experience to make it easier for customers to set up payment plans, budget billing, or get a due date extension. When, in addition to those measures, we have been out in the community. We are out in the community helping customers sign up for assistance. In October, we went to 3 events. In November, we're attending 4 events because we know, as David mentioned, that less than 20% of the people who are eligible for assistance are actually getting it in Maryland. And finally, I want to mention that the OPC's video on the 5 steps to applying for energy assistance, we've added that to our website under our Energy Assistance Finder. We are tweeting about it. We've got it on our Facebook page, and we are going to be sharing it on the Nextdoor link beginning in December. So all of these ways, whether you call BGE when you get the notice, whether you go to our website, or whether you visit us at one of the sites where we're in the community, all of these are ways of getting people connected to the assistance that they need, but we know that in many cases that doesn't start until you get that notice. And there is a measurable difference between 45, 30, or 14 days. We want to get them started with assistance, not going into another bill cycle as soon as possible. So with that, I'll close. If any questions?
I think just
yes.
one more comment from John Frayne, and then we will be happy to take questions, or we can wait until after all presentations, whichever commission prefers.
Yeah. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. John Frayne for BGE. Just very briefly, I wanted to respond to OPC's request that the Commission establish a working group to look at permanent revisions to the COMAR provisions that are at issue here. And I think BGE's response is that while, clearly we feel very strongly that these are important issues, we also recognize that there are a lot of important matters that are needing to be addressed and are being addressed right now in various working groups and various proceedings. There are limited resources that the utilities, the commission, its staff have, and we feel right now that a working group is not necessary. We have certainly been willing to and have even here today provided a lot of information and data, and we believe the information and data in front of the commission today should be sufficient for you to make a ruling, and that a working group is just not necessary at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Frayne. I do appreciate the level of data and information that were provided by the utilities and included also in the staff response. Is it fair to say that the most powerful tool in your toolbox is the termination notice?
It is. Yes.
Thank you. My colleagues, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Alpha, I'd like to start with you with a couple questions, if I could. You talk about the economy being back to pre-pandemic level, and I'll get into that in a second. It's not where I'm going on this question. And you say arrearages remain at pandemic levels, and why is that? And you give an explanation. Couldn't it be true that part of the reason that that exists is because inflation is a generational, multi-generational high, higher than it's been in decades and decades, and that real wages, in terms of family buying power, are significantly lower than they were pre-pandemic, significantly. Isn't that a rational explanation as to why this might be occurring?
It is.
Okay,
I would
because
agree with that.
because we didn't mention that. You said the economy in Maryland's humming. A lot of families don't believe that to be true. I mean, the state employees are getting a 5% raise on top this month, on top of previous wages increases, and that's not enough to keep up for a lot of state employees who are struggling payday to payday.
It's a fair point.
And I think it's important to be honest about that and say, hey, hang on here. These are not the days of don't pay your utility bills no matter what. These are very different times. All right. Let me go to motion number 4 with you, if I might.
Sure.
There's a process at the Public Service Commission with our Consumer Affairs Division. And if a consumer has a complaint on their payment plan or what they've tried to work out with utility, they call us. And we say, have you tried to work it out with utility? And they say no or yes. And if they say no, we say, you got to try there first. And they try, and sometimes they'll come back to us and they'll say, didn't get anywhere. And I'm not saying it's just BG&E, I'm talking generally. And they say, well, you can file an informal complaint or you can file a formal complaint. And oftentimes they'll go the informal complaint route, and there'll be some efforts on the part of our Consumer Affairs Division. And if they don't get satisfaction at that point, they have the option to file a formal complaint. And if they file a formal complaint, a formal decision is issued, and they have the right to appeal that. And oftentimes that appeal will wend its way to this commission. We have a 3-commissioner panel that deals with those formal appeals and makes the final ultimate decision as the ultimate adjudicatory body before going to court, of course. And what I found over the years, I don't serve on that panel now, but when I did, oftentimes I would find these nature of complaints about these fees, down payment fees or deposits being required to enter a payment plan were counterproductive in terms of getting the person on a reasonable glide slope to paying down their arrearage. Because often it was obvious they couldn't afford their bills, and oftentimes it was more of a burden. They were never going to get there because the down payment was too high or the terms were too difficult, maybe even more difficult than the original payment schedule. So is there any merit to that waiving these fees is more productive than counterproductive?
Commissioner O'Donnell, if I may, and I'll defer to Ms. Columbus in a moment. I think I can't speak to what used to happen in the past. What I can say is this: a lot of our customers now, based on our automated process, actually self-select down payments. And we know from the data and the data that the commission has now that most of those customers by far are more successful in their payment arrangements than customers who do not select down payments. And so the system that we have now, 70% of customers are doing it automatively. And these customers are selecting the kinds of down payments that they want. So what we're asking for is this flexibility to work with the customers and the customers to be able to suggest what they think they can pay, as opposed to prescribing something in a one-size-fits-all manner. I don't know if Ms. Columbus has anything to add to that.
Nothing to add.
Let me just say this. I suspect we haven't received many of these complaints as I described them lately because of this waiver. But I suspect if we return this waiver to pre-COVID, they're going to start dumping back in here again. And so you can say people do this voluntarily and everybody's happy and hunky-dory, but that's not the world that I see here from my perspective.
Fair, and I think that's a fair point. What I would say is even in this waiver period, people have they can select what we don't mandate any.
I'm not, maybe BG&E is like that, but I know all utilities aren't like that. Some utilities are pretty rough. They use this as the second most effective cudgel. Just a fact.
Appreciate that, Commissioner.
Okay. I think that's all. Let me go to Ms. Columbus. Let me ask you about motion 2, termination notice. Because of the discussion I had with Mr. Ralph about the economy and how people are hurting, there's no good time to return to pre-COVID levels, and we know it has to happen, pre-COVID regulatory structure. We know it has to happen eventually. And there's no good time to do that. We just got to pull the bandage off at some point. Understood. But here, when people are hurting, we're going into the winter heating season, we're going into the holidays, and we're before this commission saying, leave us, start hammering them again with the most effective tool we got in our tool bag. Why is that like kind of humane? Wouldn't it be better to do in the spring?
So, with all due respect, I'm not seeing it as a hammer. I'm seeing it as a way for them to reach out. Until they get that notice, I know that people don't reach out. And so
I'm suggesting some people are going to be terminated.
So, if they qualify for assistance, I want to get them into that rubric as soon as possible. And one thing that that OPC mentioned is that there's a paucity of people at OHEB to manage the influx of applications. But once you're in that rubric, all terminations are stayed
Right.
For a period of time. And so
But if you got 30 days to deal with it, you might be able to deal with it a little more effectively than if you got 14, you're in the holidays, you can't buy food, you can't pay your electric bill, the weight of the world is crushing down on you.
I agree that is.
Would you at least agree this is not the opportune time to do this?
I would agree that the sooner we return to pre-pandemic pay practices, the sooner we can get people assistance they need and get them the help that they qualify for.
So you don't acknowledge timing of doing this is significant when we do it, now
I do
or
acknowledge
maybe in the spring.
I acknowledge, from our perspective, from what we see about what helps customers and what we can do for our customers, the sooner we can do it for them and the sooner we can return to the 14-day pre-pandemic practice, I believe would be more helpful.
So if we do it now, it's a better deal for the customers.
I do. I think it is.
Okie dokie. Thank you.
Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I have a question for Ms. Columbus. I'm intrigued by the what you talked about where people can go on and you hook them into the application process for OHEB programs. Can you give any insights? You said 70% of the, Mr. Ralph said 75% of the people actually, pick their plan, so they're online. Can you give insights on how many customers may or may not actually have access to do this online and actually avail themselves of the opportunities to get linked into the program, the OHEB programs? In other words, is there, some customers who this just isn't an option because they're not doing things electronically? And then if you have any insights on, has that made a difference in those 5,000 customers that you've seen, like actually getting help?
Okay, so as to the first question, I don't know how many of our customers don't have access to web or mobile. We've put the Energy Assistance Finder on our website. By the beginning of December, it's actually going to be on your phone as well. We know a lot more people have phone access than web access. It is one of the reasons we are actually out in the community helping people fill out the paperwork, because we know that there are people that don't have access. So I don't have numbers in Maryland, what are the number of people that have access to a web or don't have, but I do know that the number of people that are going on the website, the fact that we've had 5,000 people just in the last 6 weeks go through the entire process and find the assistance that they're entitled to is encouraging to me. It's encouraging that many people are using it and that it's working. And I'm sorry, tell me your second question
Just
again.
once do you have any information from OHAP in terms of
Oh,
what
no,
happens
because
and
that
what's happening?
process can take a while, and often they need, the way the website is working, and I encourage actually people to go on it, it's pretty impressive. If you see the website, it tells you all the documentation you'll need up front. So you know to get your, a copy of your lease or your driver's license or whatever it is you need. And then it actually says, click here to start the process, and you're automatically taken to OHAB's website to complete the paperwork. I don't have figures on how many additional OHAB applications have been completed yet through those 5,000 clicks and completions. So I can.
Well, that's okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm actually going to go on the website and try it myself.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Just a couple of questions. First, we heard some comments from, in this proceeding on this point especially, and just in general from the fuel fund and from, to a certain extent, from the People's Council, suggesting that a number of organizations and entities aside from OHAB that provide assistance to consumers who need it are not yet accepting applications in person. And they don't have the automated processes that you're referencing now. So if they are receiving the termination notices and don't have the ability to go in person and follow the processes that they would have followed pre-pandemic, what's your response to the entities out there that provide assistance who are saying they're not ready to provide assistance yet?
So I'm sorry, I just want to clarify the question. So if they can't use online mechanisms, you're saying, is that your question?
No,
Or they can't use in-person mechanisms?
yeah, there are other organizations aside from OHAB to provide
Yes,
assistance.
Fuel Fund, for instance.
And the utilities and various, well, the utilities in general have received payments from those organizations, and they are not yet back to pre-pandemic status in terms of letting customers come in and get assistance.
Yeah, so what I would say about that is, I think that's an issue that obviously needs to be worked out, but I don't think the timing of when you go back to the 14-day notice is going to impact that. The 14-day notice just gets customers to actually contact the agency, whether it's in person, whether it's online, to seek assistance. And once you're in the OHEP system, then the whole process is extended or stayed at that time. So again, I want to be clear, there's not a utility here that's rushing to terminate our own customers. What we know is that the notice provision actually gets customers to act. So I appreciate that there is that issue and that concern. I just think that what we need to get is to change customer behavior and get them, because like I said, we know that customers call us when they get the notice and then start asking what they can do at that point. And I know that's what the testimony was from OHEP as well.
So I guess my point is that, and this is just in response to the justification that the company has presented, by giving customers a notice, it gives them the opportunity to take action. One of the actions that they would take is to go to some agencies that are telling us they're not ready to receive them yet. And so consumers have less options than they had pre-pandemic, than what they had before. So I guess in response to that, I understand that the customers will, by receiving a shorter period, they certainly have the opportunity to take an action. They just have limited places where they can go than what they used to have.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is it that they have
Absolutely.
more limited action, or is it that the modes of their getting that is more limited than it was before? Because if it's the latter, if it's just that they have, that fuel fund doesn't have the online systems, or, excuse me, in-person systems access set up, but they have other means online, when they contact us, and certainly, you know, if they contact the fuel fund, I'm sure, or any of these, there's going to be discussion about how to get them the access. So even if they can't go in person, there's going to be a dialogue about how to get them the access. So I believe what they're saying is that they don't have the in-person capability currently, not that they don't have the capability.
Well, they'll hear. Fuel Fund, I believe, is on our agenda for later, so we'll hear from them on that. But what I would suggest is that, or what I would say, there are a number of other organizations and entities other than the Fuel Fund and OHEB that provide assistance to consumers when they receive the turn-off notice. I mean, both of those agencies have limited amounts of money that they provide. And there are some customers that travel to a number of places to kind of gather up money in order to provide assistance. And what I'm suggesting is that not every entity that in the past, pre-pandemic, provided assistance is prepared to do it now. Even if the utility companies are using a shorter, well, even if the customer has a turn-off notice in their hand. Whether or not they'll be ready in the future, you know, some later period of time, I don't know. They haven't talked to us. They haven't filed in this docket. But we've heard, at least from some of the organizations that are out there, that have made this suggestion to us, and so that's why I was asking for your response to that. But you know, and just in interest of time, I have a few other questions I'll move on to. The company mentioned that you were making a number of efforts to help customers apply for energy assistance through your online website, doing some things in person, etc. I'm curious as to what's the structure behind that. Is there a certain amount of customers you're hoping to, I mean, do you have a goal? Is a number of people you're hoping to assist? We already know, and you've mentioned this already, that 80% of the customers who are eligible don't participate. That's post-pandemic, pre-pandemic, since the beginning of all these programs. So is there, above that 20%, is there a certain number that you're hoping to address, or are you just looking to help everybody get back to the 20% we had before?
Do you want to say that?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry, I apologize.
So, do I have a target number? So, if you're going to ask us as a company, I'd like to see everybody that's entitled to assistance get it. I think there are a number of measures across the state that people are looking at it, legislative matters that OHAB is looking at, that we would be supportive of, for instance. Categorical eligibility is one. But we have a target of reaching, I don't have an actual number, but we have as many customers as possible. So when we realize that we're only reaching X number through people calling us, that's when we scale up our efforts to get out into the community. We are keeping track of how many customers we've touched and how many we've assisted with assistance. And then I'm keeping all kinds of stats on the energy assistance tracker and how many people are visiting it, completing or going through the entire process, and then working with OHAB or the Fuel Fund or anybody else to get the assistance.
So is it fair to say then, or to characterize the company's process here as more reactive? When the customer gets the notice, they reach the company assists?
Well, no,
Or is it
no, I
the
don't
way
think.
around?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Or-
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
Okay, or is it more of a, well, and that's what I'm trying to understand, is it
Yeah.
more of a, when a customer contacts you, you provide these assistance, or
Yeah.
are you providing them proactively
Yeah,
before
both.
the notices?
Both.
Okay.
So we have used our data analytics team to identify. It's hard because I don't always have income on customers, right? But we've used our data analytics team to identify people that we think might be qualified for assistance. And so starting about 6 months ago, I started mailing letters to them with an energy assistance application proactively. And to date, I actually don't have those numbers with me today. I can get them for you, but I have the figures on how many people have both opened and responded to the letter. We have emails that we send out as well for people that we have identified that might be qualifying for assistance. So it's both proactive and reactive. And then, but the important point earlier that I was making is that once you call, there are all kinds of very specific things you can do if you call or go to our website or meet, in person. So, yeah.
All right, so I just have one last question, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to take everybody's time up, but, and BG, you were first, so you got most of them. But, just my last question has to do with the transition. In the event the commission were to, let's assume the commission moves forward with the proposal, your requests, and modifies the motions as you sought them. Are you planning on moving back to not just the termination notice distribution rules from COMAR, but policy-wise across the board? Is it back to what you did pre-pandemic?
In what particular, let me say it this way with regard to the motion orders that we're talking about. We understand, and this is why I think with regard to the other motion orders, we're asking for flexibility, because we do understand that every customer situation is different. What we are asking for is that flexibility to have those kinds of discussions and work with our customers instead of having a prescriptive one-size-fits-all approach. With regard to termination notices, I want to stress again, we are not in any rush to terminate our own customers. What we do want to do is to get them to contact us or contact OHEP or other energy assistance. That's what we know from the data happens, and that's what we're asking for. I don't know if that answers the question that you asked, but
It does a little bit, but I'll save it for some of the other companies. So I can
Okay.
let them have some fun too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this question is probably for you, Mr. Frayne, since you discussed the OPC recommendation. I think I think all of us are concerned and alarmed by the after $83 million in assistance last July, that we're seeing numbers tick up to the pre-COVID, or actually pre-assistance levels of arrearages. So going back to this idea that maybe it's time to look at the collection methods, given that we have all this data now and been collected and has been very useful to the commission, would this be a good time to really analyze that and see if it does provide some insights as to changes in our collection methodologies and perhaps in even the prevention plans that we have in this state to try to keep people out of this circumstance in the first place?
I think that our position would be that the existing COMAR provisions worked very well for a number of years. That is not to say that there aren't additional measures and initiatives and things that need to be done, because we know that customers even prior to the pandemic were some customers were struggling, quite frankly, right? So it's not to say that there aren't additional things that need to be done, just that we don't believe that the COMAR provisions that are at issue here, changing those long term are the solution to the customer issues that were faced even before the pandemic.
Okay. We are, in fact, though, just getting back to where we were under the previous methodologies. I don't want to call them the gold standard, but if that's how you're looking at them. But again, if we're trying to look at this at this time with all the information we have, is there anything we can be doing differently to try to improve the way we handle this in this state? I mean, I think Commissioner Linton, you had that discussion about just some of the programs, the assistance programs, and how they're not getting out in an effective manner. So again, this seems to be a very important issue, in fact, and again, why wouldn't this be the opportune moment to actually take up the OPC's recommendation and have this discussion?
Yeah, again, I think that OPC's, kind of motion in terms of looking at the COMAR provisions that exist today, we don't believe that a working group is necessary to look at those specific COMAR provisions, but there is absolutely a lot that is being done, and certainly we've spoken to things that we're doing and other matters that are being considered by a number of other parties, including OHEP and categorical eligibility and other things that are very important things that we do need to be working on, and we are fully supportive of moving forward with.
Okay, and I guess just the last question. You'd mentioned this a moment ago in your answer about measures. Does the company have certain measures that inform whether or not your processes are working, if you're effective in your collections? And is that something that might inform perhaps a statewide metric on collections?
Well, we certainly track arrearage balances and when they're going down. Is that your question? I may not be understanding.
Well, maybe, let me ask a question about just your metrics internally, and, are there things that you discuss at EEI or EPRI about industry metrics and how you compare to your effectiveness in collections and, the other side keeping customers connected? Again, I guess it's going to that OPC recommendation. If there's something that could be gleaned at this moment in time to set maybe those measures, as that was the term you used, Mr. Frayne, to try to do this on a statewide, more uniform manner.
Yeah, and I guess I should, clarify. By measures, I was intending to mean actions, initiatives, things that, we might look at doing rather than, metrics. Not to say that we are not looking at, kind of customer metrics, right, regularly and trying to understand the, what might be going on and if there's other things that we couldn't be doing. But specifically by measures, I was talking about, actions and initiatives.
Okay, and are there things that you do through EPRI and EEI, in this area that again might inform, where we fit in this state and with our utilities?
So yes, so the very first is among our 4 utilities, right? We share practices, we share metrics, we share what's working, what's not. Then we're on EEI working committees where we talk about I go to customer meetings where I'm hearing from all utilities across the country, eSource and JD Power, which have a grouping of all customer leaders, and we talk about what's working, what's not, whether our metrics are measuring the right things. So we have a lot of ways to get data on what's working to help our customers, because this is a problem that we are seeing, across the country. Yeah.
Okay, well, I appreciate those answers.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ralph, I wanted to follow up on some of your response to Commissioner Linton's questions. You seem to indicate that this notice was, we all know better, but this notice was simply to help the customer get assistance. That's not what this is. These notices we're talking about are termination notices. They're lawful termination notices. And anybody that seeks assistance as a side effect of this notice, that's a side effect. That's not what this notice is about, right? Would you agree with that? This is about we're going to terminate you if you don't take care of this.
The notice is a termination notice.
Okay, and right now that notice period is 30 days. It exists today. And you said staff came up with a half measure to split the baby or cut it in half 30 days. Where'd that 30 days come from? It came from order number 90333 of this commission. This is not a new idea of staff's. This is what this commission has decided. As balancing the interest of the utilities, who we have to maintain healthy financially, and the interest of consumers in some very difficult times in our state. What happens at the end of the notice period?
What happens at the end of the notice period depends. If the customer,
Assume that they haven't sought assistance, they haven't responded to you, they haven't worked out a payment plan, they haven't even contacted you. What happens at the end of that period?
well, there's a number of variables that go into play. Whether or not, you look at weather conditions, you look at medical.
Assume it's
issues,
cold, but we don't trigger the COMAR requirements for no cutoffs.
Then it's possible that terminations could be in process, would be in process.
I'm trying to understand, like, when that may occur.
It's not immediate. It certainly, we don't, like I said, there isn't a rush on our part to try to terminate customers. So it is not something that's immediate,
So 14 days or 30 days, I think I'm hearing, doesn't make a difference.
but it does to the customer. And that's what we're trying to,
Well, I think you and I agree there. It does.
and it gets them to actually act is what all the data shows.
Yeah, this is difficult. I mean, you heard me acknowledge that we need to do this at some point, but I'm not sure that this is the time to do that, but I've already made that, I went down that path. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to BGE. We will now call up the Potomac Electric Power Company and Potomac Edison. If both utilities could join us at the table. Good morning, Mr. Mike Hill. If you could enter an appearance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Douglas E. Micheel, M-I-C-H-E-E-L, appearing on behalf of Potomac Electric Power Company and Delmarva Power and Light Company. To my immediate left is Ms. Willa Hightower, the Vice President of Customer Operations for PHI, and she is in charge of both the PEPCO and the Delmarva Customer Service Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Mike Hill. We reviewed your comments of September 29th. Do you have anything additional to add?
I have a few brief responses based on some of the questions from the bench and our view, and then I know Ms. Hightower has some comments to address our particular situation with both PEPCO and Delmarva Power. First of all, like Baltimore Gas and Electric Company, the PHI companies support staff's recommendation to repeal 3 and 4, the emergency motions 3 and 4. With respect to the emergency motion 2 on the 30 days, it's our view that the better result would be to go back to the COMAR 14 days. That said, I understand the why the 30-day number in the order 9333 may be appropriate. I just want to say this, even if this commission were to order today, going back to the current COMAR, it would take us well past the holidays to get that into the system, and so it would be the 30 days would still be in place until after the holidays. I mean, we acknowledge and don't question what staff said in its filing about the inflationary measures and inflation and how that's impacting our customers. It is having a real impact. What I would point out is that these emergency proposals were put in place for the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think I agree with Mr. Ralph that pandemic, as I wear a mask, is generally over, and we're back, and we're back to doing things we did pre-pandemic. That doesn't mean that inflation is not a concern and that customers are not, our everyday Maryland families are not seeing increased prices and pay is not keeping up. So we can understand that, but the better way would be to go back to the 14 days. That said, obviously this commission could time the order past the holidays, and at least for the PHI companies, even if you ruled from the bench, we wouldn't be able to put the 14-day order in past the holidays. On the OPC working group question, we don't think it's time for a working group, and the reason we don't think it's time for a working group is we've had 2 years now where we've been under the emergency rules, the emergency requirements, and prior to that, although not perfect, the COMAR, the well-thought-out COMAR protections that we had in place were working. And so we think it's premature to have a working group right now until we go back to the old COMAR rules and see how they work. We don't know that they're going to fail, and pre-pandemic, I think they worked pretty well, balancing the interests of customers and companies. And I think the companies are all prepared to work with their customers. Nobody wants to cut customers off. We all want customers to get reasonable payment plans. Unfortunately, for some customers, that's a tough call, and that's a societal ill. With that, I'm happy to answer questions, but I want to turn it over to Ms. Hightower for a little bit of specific information on the PHI companies.
Thank you, ma'am. If you could state and spell your name.
Absolutely. My name is Willa Hightower, Willa, Hightower, Highttower. Thank you. As has been noted, I don't think our position is significantly different from BGE's, but I think he stated it very well just in terms of our ability to execute and the timing in which that would occur. I do want to highlight that we are doing a number of things to proactively reach out to our customers, continuing to make them aware of some of the assistance that's available, whether that be online, our CSRs who are more than happy to address calls and concerns, and with regards to the payment agreements that we make available. Our standard practice is to offer at least 2 12-month payment agreements for customers requiring no down payment. That was pre and post pandemic. So, and that's not something that we're looking to change. And then as necessary, we are willing to offer additional payment agreements that we will ask for a down payment. Even during this time frame, we've had, my colleague Denise Galambos mentioned, we've had customers who do make payment agreements such that they're affordable on a monthly basis, where they will start with a down payment. And I think in some of the data that's been submitted, that we've seen that generally they're more successful in terms of paying down their arrearages. And that's where we all want to be. Some of the things that we've seen from a data perspective is the average balances current from now, and we're comparing it to 2019 pre-pandemic, we've seen a 75% increase. Not where anybody wants to be. And we know that there are a number of factors that really factor into that, as has been discussed a little bit earlier. But we have a very aggressive and a very proactive media, digital, as well as paper processes in place. We have a number of in-person outreach activities that we have already scheduled and already taking place, some in October, as well as looking at the balance of the year as well, that we're trying to do our best in terms of reaching out to customers to make sure that they get the assistance that they need. And I think it is a true statement that they have a lot of customers, especially those in need, have a number of things that they're trying to juggle, and sometimes it just doesn't reach the top of their to-do list. And the noticing process helps push them a little bit along to start addressing that. But has been stated, we don't want to terminate a customer, but we want to make sure that we all end up in a better place, and making sure that customers get assistance, making sure that their outstanding balances are at a place where the assistance that's available can really help pay that down as quickly as possible. And getting the assistance before the balances get out of control is one of the best ways that we can do it, and OHEP is definitely a partner in helping to make that happen.
Thank you, Ms. Hightower. Questions for PHI? Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. That was very interesting. Do you have any way to evaluate the efficacy of the proactive activities that you do, and how do you decide, whether you do an outreach event or mailings, or do you do them all? Just curious as to, how you decide and how influential they are.
Yeah, so we often, sometimes it's hard for us to know because we're not processing the assistance application. So to have that specific information, it's hard to know. But we do take the stance that the more information that we put out there, and we try to leverage different forms. It's not just online, but that's why we do the outreach events in case customers are not accessing the information online. So digital obviously is an economic way to do it, but the mailers, Denise mentioned the door hangers that we do, bill inserts. So we try to address it in a number of ways such that we can get to as many customers as possible.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner O'Donnell, then Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice President Hightower, thanks for being here. I wanted to ask you about the customer experience because that's your wheelhouse. Young folks like to do things on their phone. Mm-hmm. In fact, some of my grandchildren, they're so technology oriented, they run rings around me on their cellular devices, which isn't saying much, I suppose. But have you ever tried to go on OHEP? You say OHEP's your partner. Have you ever tried to go on OHEP's assistance application process from a mobile device?
No, but that's one of the things that I do acknowledge that one of the things that we've done on our side, when we look at things from a web perspective, we used to design things to work on a computer. And then when you try to pull it up on your phone, it just doesn't work as well. So one of the things that we've done in our testing process is make sure that the digital phone, that's a better experience. And so we've shifted even how we design our website and to be able to access information such that it can work on handheld devices as opposed to requiring you to be in front of a computer. Now, there may be some things that you do need to upload that you may need a computer for, but we're doing our part in trying to make sure we're doing our design work to make sure that the information is easily accessible to customers using a mobile phone.
Yeah, I think Mr. Michael is well aware of my previous discussions and proceedings where I know a college graduate, very well educated, 30-something, who couldn't do it, and she showed it to me. She said, "I can't do it. This is impossible. Nobody can do this." And I think OHEP acknowledges that, and they keep promising this new super whammy-dine information system is going to fix all that, but we haven't seen any of the fruits of that. So the problem is not always what the utility notice is, or the problem is not how much assistance you can give them. The problem is that this assistance isn't dispersed because people can't get there from here. And I think sometimes we fool ourselves that they can, and they can't. And they're not going to. And they don't have, as Commissioner Linton said, they don't have the walk-in capabilities to do that sort of stuff right now. So, and their want is to do it on a phone. And they don't. And so my fear is we still are going to have excessive terminations. And we're trying to balance the interest of that. We know you got to terminate. We know it's a tool, and it's an effective tool. And we know eventually we got to get back to the 14-day point. But if we think we're going to have, by going back to 14 days, a large increase in people accessing these available assistance funds, I think we're deluding ourselves. That's just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had a question for Mr. Makil. You touched a little bit on one of the topics that I was saving for a future panel, so congratulations.
I don't know yet whether congratulations.
So you touched a little bit on the transition. So assuming that we'll assume again that that everything the utilities have asked for is granted by the commission. You already noted that it would take you, the company, Pepco, I'm assuming just Pepco, is it PHI or Pepco? It would take a couple of months.
We have DPL Maryland as well as
Yes.
Pepco Maryland.
So it's for both companies, it would take about 2 months or so to implement the new change, or to change back to the old process?
Yeah, with computers, that's, yes, getting the system right, yes.
Okay, so that would mean that we'd be in January of next year, where customers would start receiving the notices that would be a 14-day turnaround time. Is there a reason why it has to be January as opposed to later? I mean, that's right in the middle of the winter restriction period, for example.
No, there's no reason why, and I guess your point there is the point I was going to make. It would be in the middle of the winter restriction period anyway, Commissioner, and so we do not turn off when it's cold.
So Pepco, I know, every company's not like that, but certainly some companies have made that choice. But it's not required in the statute or COMAR. It's also a period of time when consumers have a little more difficulty moving around just because of the weather. It's a bit more challenging. Are there other things that the company is doing or envisions doing to assist from a transition perspective? All of your customers for the last 2.5+ years have been living under a different type of collection model from you. And to shift back to a new model, or what to some of them will be a different model from what they were used to. And it clearly will be something that will get some attention from them and from consumer advocates and other parties. So what is the company's thought on that? You're talking about doing something that could be potentially in 2 months' time.
I'll let Ms. Hightower talk about what our transition plans are, or if we have them.
Yeah, so, I mean, as I mentioned, we have a very thick and a very detailed communications plan in place. So any changes that we would make that information very public. As far as, the conversations that our CSRs would have with our customers, understanding the flexibility, doing our part to support customers and being able to access assistance, that's where we're trying to work towards. And as I mentioned, we offer 2 12-month agreements within a 12-month period of time to customers that require no down payment.
Okay, so have you received any feedback from people in the community, various organizations that not necessarily are OHIPs and fuel funds, or in this case to be Washington, but other entities out there that provide assistance to consumers and are aware of the fact that you have this request before the commission and are seeking to go back to the old model? Has there been any feedback from them, and what's been as part of your plan to prepare them for the transition? What's your how are you doing that?
I'm not aware of any feedback that we've received explicitly around returning to pre-pandemic policies. I don't know that we've asked that question explicitly, so I'm not aware. I'm not saying that there haven't been any conversations with people in the organization, but I'm not aware at this time.
Okay.
But as we move forward, if we're making changes, we will proactively reach out to the entities that provide assistance and let them know what the changes are, so that we can figure out how we can put customers in a better position.
Okay. I guess my point is that we would want, in the event that the commission moves forward with some change either now or in the future, we want to make sure that the what we would tend to call the assistance network is prepared.
Right.
And then they may not be ready in 2 months, where the utilities can be. So that's it. That's all I had. Thank you for your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to PHI. We'll now turn to Potomac Edison.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Jeffrey Trout, Counsel to the Potomac Edison Company. With me today is Denise DeCluet. She is the Director of Revenue Operations, and she's going to be making a short presentation to you with some summarized data that is consistent with and largely overlaps with what's in our September 28th filing. Before her presentation, I would like to make 3 points in response to the discussion that has occurred to date and in anticipation of some questions that Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Linton, and others have asked my colleagues and may be planning to ask me. So the first point is that the rules that were in place for many years up to August of 2020 work and worked. And the data that you have in front of you dramatically demonstrates that. The number of Potomac Edison customers, residential and non-residential, that fall into arrears over the course of any given year under the normal rules is relatively small. I believe it's consistently less than 20%. So the number of people who would get termination notices over the course of a year would be significantly lower than 20% of our would be lower than 20% of our customer base. So that's the group you're talking about. Now, of the customers who fall into arrears and get one or more termination notices, the number of customers who actually get terminated are 2 out of 100. In other words, 98% of the time, under the normal rules, when we send a term notice to a customer, either because we reach out to them or because they reach out to us, we work things out with those customers. They either manage to pay their bill, or they enter into an arrangement with us, or something else happens so that we do not have to terminate them. That's a 98% success rate under the pre-COVID rules. I respectfully submit to you that that's a success story. And that's what we need to get our way back to. And a crucial part, and I don't think this has been made clear yet, but I want to make it clear, and this is something that Ms. DeCluett can speak to even better than I, because she's in the operation. I see it indirectly. But a critical part of that is the 14-day notice, because we are on 30-day billing periods. And when you send a term notice and then the billing period expires, you haven't terminated them, you have to start the process. You're in a new billing cycle. You have to start the process all over again. So when we're doing 45-day termination notices, every single termination notice had to be worked manually, and the result was the very few terminations that you saw during this period, and the very high arrearage accumulations that you saw during this period. When we first filed our petition in June, and staff recommended going from the 45-day rule that was set in August, they recommended going to a 30-day rule, and the commission accepted that, and that's now what we're operating under, the new 30-day rule. But I'm sorry, but it was proposed as a compromise. It was accepted by the commission as a compromise, but it is not a compromise that in fact accomplishes anything, because we still, with 30 days, we still have to work every notice manually. Every notice winds up expiring because it goes into a new billing period, and it doesn't accomplish anything. 14 days gets the job done, and gets the job done in a way that 98% of the customers wind up not getting terminated. So that's why we think it's very important to go back to the normal rules. That's my first point. Second point, and squarely to you, Commissioner O'Donnell, and to you, Commissioner Linton, with your questions about the timing. What would happen? Well, first of all, on the issue of timing, we tried, by submitting our petition in June, the beginning of June, as I recall, we tried to get this accomplished before we got to the winter period. And that has not happened, and that's history. But now we're in the winter restriction period. And to my mind, this is the ideal period to do the transition back to the normal rules, because virtually no one is going to get terminated in the winter. I would direct your attention to page 3 of our September 28th filing. And I would direct your attention to the columns that show month by month how many customers, actually residential and non-residential, total terminations, occurred by month during the 5 months of the winter restriction period under the normal rules. Under the normal rules in 2019, we terminated fewer than 100 customers. Okay? So if you switch right this second back to the normal rules, that's what you would be looking at for the results between now and the end of March of next year. That would be the normal winter operating under the normal rules for us. So you're not going to see, whether you switch now or you continue to wait, you're not going to see a lot of terminations in the winter, and that's because of the normal operation of the normal winter restrictions. So, to my mind, getting back to the 14-day rule and getting termination notices out, and we probably, because of the winter restrictions, we probably won't be acting on them, but getting customers to engage by getting the notices out, that's an excellent use of the next 4.5 months. And then in the spring, you return to the normal spring, and the normal, as we discussed in point 1, is 98% of the customers who get termination notices do not get terminated. That's my second point. Finally, do we want to have a rulemaking? I've practiced in front of this commission for 21 years. I've been through 3 rulemakings that I can remember. There may have been more, but I can remember 3 rulemakings in this area. I think we've adjusted these rules over the course of the last 2 decades to make them work very well. And again, the numbers support that these rules work well for everybody, including the customers. That said, if the commission wants to do a rulemaking anywhere in this energy assistance, low income, service termination rules space, we will participate. But what you have to bear in mind is that while any such rulemaking is going on, the normal rules would apply unless and until you complete a rulemaking to change the rules. And that is because of the elephant in the room, which nobody wants to talk about, but since I'm the designated bad cop in this fraternity, I will.
You and I share that rule, sir.
Fair enough. We apparently have a natural proclivity towards that. The basis for the Commission's August 2020 order, which, not through a rulemaking, changed the regulations in a number of different areas, some of which changes still stand today and that the utilities have asked you to revoke. The legal basis for that was the governor's emergency declaration. And none of the utilities challenged that, and I do not challenge it today, that was an appropriate legal basis for what the commission did in August of 2020. The governor's declaration expired more than a year ago, we are no longer and have not for more than a year been operating under emergency rules in the state of Maryland. So with great respect, I say to the 5 of you, there is no legal basis any longer for you to suspend the rules. If you want to change the rules, you have full power and authority to do that, but you need to go through a rulemaking, and the normal rules apply while you are doing that. That's the elephant in the room, that the legal authority behind the August 2020 order is gone. Now, having made everybody upset, I will turn it over to Ms. DeCluett to hopefully, she's the designated good cop.
And Ms. DeClue, do you have a presentation?
Yes, I. Okay. You know how to do that?
All right.
All right.
Do we need a password? Nope.
Yeah, recess.
I apologize.
Good morning. Please make an appearance and spell your name.
Good morning. I'm Denise DeCluett. I'm the Director of Revenue Operations for Potomac Edison. And my last name is spelled D-E, capital C, L-U-E-T-T. All right. And so this is just a presentation that summarizes what we presented in our filing back in September. And so we wanted to look at 4 areas: termination notice period, arrears, the length of installment plans, and some of the other impacts that we're facing. So as Mr. Trout explained, when we look at our 14-day termination period compared to the 30-day and the 45-day termination period, when we look at the number of people who are actually disconnected, it is a very small number of customers who are disconnected. So pre-pandemic, it was less than 2%, and even going to 30 to 45 days is even less than 0.2%. So one of the things that we take a look at is when we had our ability to use that 14-day termination notice, customers either paid us, got assistance, or worked out some sort of plan with us to prevent their service from actually being disconnected. But when we go and look at our arrears, when we look at the pre-pandemic arrears, if we look at December of 18, you could see that the total arrears was around $6 million for all of our customers. And as we've moved through the pandemic, you can see that that number has basically doubled. And the majority of those arrears are now in that greater than 120-day time frame. So the arrears shifted, where the majority is in that 1 to 30 days, and now they're out to extend it beyond that 120-day period. And the other thing that we looked at is when we look at the average arrears amount for our customers, in 2019 it was averaging $211. Now through 2022 it's averaging $496. So as this continues, the customers' arrears continue to grow, which may make it difficult for them to get out of that situation. And this is where we looked at the length of the installment plans. And what the data tells us is that the longer the installment plan goes, the more likely that this customer is going to default on that installment plan. So you can see the numbers go when we go from 12 to 24, which we did change, that it was a 30% to 69% possibility that that customer may default on their installment plan. And then some of the other impacts that we saw is that the waiving security deposits. We would use security deposits to offset arrears or to offset our write-offs. And since we have not had that capability of charging customers security deposits, you can see that the arrears that were covered by a security deposit decreased from 8% to 3%. And when it comes to the write-offs, that security deposits covered 25% of the write-offs, and now in 2022 it's down to 15%. And with that, if you have any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. We've seen a number of those charts on your last slide with obviously the longer a payment plan goes. I think I saw in BG or PEPCO's by the third month you're up to 50%, something rather extreme. Questions for Potomac Edison. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah. Mr. Trout, you're not surprised. I'm coming back to you. You said we have to change Comar by rulemaking. We're kind of out of bounds because of the expiration of the emergency order. Do you know what Title 20, Subtitle 7, Chapter 1, 01-1 says about waiving portions of this Comar?
That's not the awesome powers clause, right?
Yep, it is. It's,
Okay.
it's a very awesome power.
It's the awesome powers clause.
Yep. It says this, for the edification of everybody. A regulation in this subtitle may be waived by the commission for good cause shown. Isn't that effectively what we're doing with these modifications? So you say we have no legal basis. It's right there.
The good cause shown in August of 2020 was the governor's emergency order, which has expired.
Yeah, that's expired, but we've continued these for good cause shown. We're waiving some of the provisions of Comar. There's nothing illegal about that.
Respectfully, Commissioner, I disagree that you've created an appropriate factual predicate to
So
continue.
you're suggesting the commission's acting illegally right now?
I am suggesting that the commission is acting beyond the legal predicate that underpinned the orders previously issued.
Has,
Yes.
has the CDC ended COVID and their
No.
guidelines?
No, it's now endemic.
Okay, and did we predicate any of the orders in 90-0333 on the emergency order?
I believe you did.
I think it was post-emergency order. It was a way of stepping it down. I could be wrong on that, and I'll go back and verify it. And if I'm wrong, I'll tell you, but I think it was a step down
Fair
from
enough.
the emergency order. Maybe not. You know, when we came into this COVID area of the regulatory kind of construct, we got promises from every investor-owned utility, every single one, and both gas and electric, and the large co-ops, that as long as a customer made a good faith effort to contact the utility, give us a call. There will be no terminations. What I think I hear you saying, though, is that was always true.
Yes.
But the utilities made a big deal about that, making that commitment. So you're telling me now that that commitment didn't mean anything because it was already practice?
I was the one who made that commitment in the hearing.
Every single utility did, 'cause I asked.
Potomac Edison. No, I know. You asked me
Mhm.
for Potomac Edison in the summer of 2020, and I said that's what we always do, and we will continue to do it. I remember.
So there were no terminations of anybody before that made a good faith effort to call you. Nothing changed with the pandemic. I heard something very different, very, very, very different because of the emergency.
All right.
Very different.
Well, I'm sorry if that's how it came across, but as the numbers you have in front of you show, pre-pandemic, 2%, often, usually less than 2%, of our customers who got termination notices would actually wind up getting terminated.
Yeah,
That's how we operated.
well,
And we've operated with the same spirit during the pandemic.
you weren't in the extremist conditions you were we all were during the pandemic, pre-pandemic. I don't, the argument doesn't square with me, I'm sorry.
I don't understand what doesn't square,
You're
Commissioner.
saying
'cause
we only did a small percentage pre-pandemic because you didn't have a whole bunch of people who couldn't pay their bills like you did during the pandemic. That's why the General Assembly gave us $87 million to disperse through you. It was a very different time. And that's
I agree
why
with that.
the important stipulations that we didn't order you to do, you agreed to do, were important because it was a different time. And we're not out of it yet. Although the president said we were. I don't think we are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to Potomac Edison. At this time, we will call up our final two utilities, Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative and Washington Gas Light.
I can close this out.
We'll begin with the cooperative. Good morning, Mr. McDougall.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Mark McDougall on behalf of Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative. To my left is Beth Mast. Ms. Mast is SMECO's collections supervisor. I wanted just to start out by saying that we are generally in alignment with BGE's presentations and their positions on the various issues. I know that while we sat back there, the Commission asked a lot of questions of not only BGE, but the other two investor-owned utilities. And so what I'd like to now do is turn it over to Ms. Mast, who can talk a little bit about SMECO's position on the timing of termination notices, deposits and down payments, and some various other issues that the Commission was interested in.
Good afternoon. As Mark has shared, I'm not going to repeat everything that you've already heard. We'll start right off with our termination period. We are in favor, as though our utilities, of going to the 14-day with the thought of, again, agreeing with the customers that continue to increase arrearage. We have not seen an influx in the number of customers. We haven't seen, of course, the influx in the amount of arrearage. And as far as deposits and down payments, SMECO does not require a deposit to make an arrangement. That is not something currently pre-COVID or during COVID that we have practiced. The down payments for the pay plans, will only help the customer to reduce the monthly bill, as you are well aware, and ultimately reduce our monthly uncollectibles, which would impact our customers. And just as far as what SMECO has taken the initiative to do to try to answer some questions before they're asked, OHEP, we do have OHEP information on our termination notices that are mailed to the property. SMECO delivers a termination notice. Even though we are not operating in winter months, we've continued through the pandemic offering that as the first delivery. And we, again, leave OHEP information in that packet. And then we return back to the property prior to disconnection of service and leave another packet with a card that just asks the customer to contact SMECO prior to termination of service, just making a last effort. And that's physically at the property. We also complete 3 calls to the customers, 2 during the daytime, 1 during the evening. we ultimately our last resort is termination. That is not what SMECO, looks to do. We try to work with every customer if the need arises to offer arrangements. And as the order 90333 stated, the 1 in 18 months pay plan default, SMECO is currently allowing our customers to have 2 defaults in a 6-month period. And if you've exceeded that and we are up for disconnection, we're making a one-time courtesy to, again, work with that customer prior to disconnection of service. And I think, do you have anything else?
All right, thank you, and we're available for any questions any of the commissioners might have.
Thank you. I don't believe we had you on the record.
Oh, sorry. My name is Beth Mast. That's Bethmast, and I'm the collections supervisor with SMECO.
Thank you, Ms. Mast. Do my colleagues have questions for SMECO? We will turn to Washington Gas Light. Let me ask council, did Washington Gas Light file comments on September 29th?
No, Chairman, it did not, and that's for various reasons that I think I'm about to get into.
Okay, because I'm looking for them and I don't have them. Thank you. Council.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Commissioners. Spencer Nichols on behalf of Washington Gas Light Company. The company does not have much except to echo many of the comments that were made here today by the other utilities. And I think, as the Commission knows, that's because Washington Gas is in somewhat of a different position than some of the other utilities here. And as the Commission is well aware, the company is under various limitations, both self-imposed and through other proceedings, particularly that related to its customer service center, that have imposed various limitations on the company related to dunning and disconnects. So in the end, I think that what that means for this particular proceeding is that Washington Gas will not be as affected or affected in the same way as many of the other utilities here. And that's part of the reason why I think the company did not have any particular updated comments to submit to the Commission here, and it would just defer to its previous comments in its joint filing as well as in its regularly reported metrics. And I also neglected to introduce my colleagues here. We have Sam Katibanaz. He is a Senior Manager, Customer Collections and Reporting, and Michelle Musgrove, our Vice President of Customer Experience. And with that, we are ready for any questions.
Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question for WGL. And good morning. Yes, good morning. Are you still sending turn-off notices to customers?
No, we're not.
So I know you're not disconnecting. What is your plans for after the end of the winter restriction period?
I'll turn that over to my colleague.
Yes, Sam Katibanaz, Khatibinaz. It depends on the result of the call center filing that we did, I think, a month ago. So if we can resume dunning, it would be about 75 days after a customer receives a bill that we would be able to disconnect. That's normally the time frame. And it would be, starting April 1st after the winter restriction period.
All right, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you to Washington Gas.
Mr. Chairman, can I just, from the previous panel, just confirm, I have gone back and looked at 90333, and it was issued August 25th, 2022, and it was in anticipation of the announced expiration of the governor's executive order, which was announced by the office of the executive to expire on August 31st, 2022. That's why we issued that order. It was a step-down order.
Paragraph 9. At this point, we will call to the table staff and Office of People's Counsel. Good morning to our staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. James Greger on behalf of staff. Also from staff, we have Drew McCullough, Director of our Electricity Division, Eric Delgado, also from our Electricity Division, and Dr. Pamela Coates of the Telecommunication, Gas, and Water Division. Staff does not have a presentation this morning, but did file comments on October 20th. Based on the supplemental information filed by utilities on September 28th and 29th, and other data filed in the PC53 docket, including monthly arrearage reports, staff recommends that the Commission retain the 30-day notice period for service terminations and lift the emergency motions concerning the 12-month minimum payment plan length and the prohibition on down payment collections as a condition for alternative payment plans. Staff notes that not all companies who signed on to the June 1st Joint Utilities request provided the supplemental information directed in Commission Order 90333. However, from the data supplied by the companies that did respond, staff is making the recommendation to rescind emergency motions 3 and 4. Staff's primary concern is that the longer these emergency motions remain in effect, the larger the costs associated with these measures will become, and sometime in the future these costs will need to be recovered. In response to the utilities' comments as far as Motion 2, we would note that the 30-day modification to Motion 2 only occurred on August 25th of 2022, so there hasn't been a long period to collect data and see the results from that change. And in regards to PE's comment as far as the legal basis of these emergency motions, I would point out that it's staff's position that these modifications, whether the Commission retains these emergency orders or rescinds them, is purely within the discretionary authority of the Commission. That being said, thank you, and we're available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Greger, and thank you to your team. I appreciated all the data analysis in the brief that you filed in response to the utility comments. I do not have any questions for staff. Seeing none, we'll turn to Office of People's Counsel.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Frederick Hoover on behalf of the Office of People's Counsel, and I have with me Brandy Nealon, the Director of our Consumer Assistance. You have our filed comments, and I'll just make a few comments based on the discussion that's been going on earlier today, and then turn it over to Ms. Nealon, who will talk more specifically about some of our concerns about removing the changes. OPC requests that the Commission maintain the modifications that were adopted in Order Number 90333 with the 3 motions, keeping the 30-day termination notice requirement, maintaining the universal minimum 12-month payment plan for all customers, and prohibiting utilities from requiring down payments and deposits from customers as a condition of beginning a payment plan. In response to some of the discussions that's come earlier, not surprisingly, we agree with the thoughts that have been offered that this may be the wrong time to switch back to the pre-COVID restrictions. In particular, not only the concerns regarding the economy, which we can argue the economic statistics have been presented by both staff and us, but our concern is that, as was mentioned earlier, inflation is having an impact on a lot of the costs that affected the customers that we represent, and particularly the low-income customers. And some of those inflationary costs are things that they do not have an ability to really control. Whatever the cost is, they have to pay it. And in particular, we're concerned that as we're entering the winter heating period, the Energy Information Agency, EIA, recently issued its Winter Fuels Outlook, and they made predictions of seeing significant price increases in all of the heating fuels that customers use across the board: home heating oil, natural gas, electricity, propane. Some of those products are not controlled at all by the government, and so customers are forced to pay whatever the price is going to be. And so it's our view that going into the winter heating period, particularly in a situation where you can have almost assured increases in the price for heating one's home, as well as the concern that if, as staff mentioned, with the statistics they brought from the Federal Reserve, if inflation actually does drop significantly, it's probably going to be coming with a recession. And what that means is that the folks that we represent, particularly those that deal on paycheck to paycheck, may be the first ones affected by a recession and job losses related to that. So for those reasons, it's our view that maintaining the the current modifications that were adopted in Order 90333 make sense, particularly during the winter heating period. And then when spring comes, we can then look at trying to make adjustments for that. As a follow-up to that, it's our view that we should take advantage of the opportunity, if you maintain those restrictions, to take a look at the termination regulations. I mean, this commission responded to the COVID emergency by adopting policies and procedures to protect customers from the economic consequences, the social consequences of the COVID opportunities. It showed, as lots of organizations saw, things that have happened and needs to examine or accepted procedures. And so what we're thinking now is, let's take advantage of that opportunity to take a look at the termination regulations that have been in place for a long, long time. We can do this as an informal working group, just to sort of look to see what provisions maybe should be adopted as permanent parts of the termination regulations, and other things that may be examined. Take advantage of this time period during the winter heating season when terminations don't usually occur, to look at the regulations to see what we need to do going forward. So that's why it's our view that, using this opportunity to create this work group to look at the regulations is a unique opportunity on our part. And then we're cognizant of the fact that, increasing arrearages are problems for our clients too, because ultimately these costs are going to be attempted to be collected in rates, and so our customers are going to be paying that bill too. So we have skin in this game, but at this point our view is, let's maintain the policies that you adopted in August, keep them through the winter heating season, see what things look like in the spring, and then examine those things. Now I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Nealon, who will discuss some of the direct aspects that our office has with both utilities, government agencies, and the private groups that provide energy assistance, and can give you some reflections on what customers go through in accessing that process right now.
Hi, everyone, Commissioners, Chairman. This is my first time here. I'm sure you don't recognize me, so it's really exciting to not be watching you on your YouTube channel.
Oh boy,
and
we have
seeing
some
this-
questions for you.
Oh, good. So
Miss
before
Nealon, so if you can enter an appearance by spelling your name.
Brandy Nealand, Brandy with an I, and then Nealand, Nieland.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
And do you have a presentation you'd like us to load?
I have one slide. I was going to put it up a little later, but
Okay.
whenever you
Whenever you're ready, you push the button. You're-
Okay. All right, sounds good. So before I get started, I just wanted to first of all thank BG&E for promoting our video, which we partnered with a nonprofit to create. So we're really pleased about that. It had gotten, I think, around 30,000 views, and every little bit helps. I also wanted to thank some of the reflections that the commission has had, and I think I'm going to be saying a lot of what you've kind of been alluding to and putting some numbers and some faces behind what you've been talking about. I also wanted to just quickly address the 30 days. And people talk about how once that OHEP application is in, you're protected. It's true, but not totally true. There's some nuances to that. So if I turn in my OHEP application and I'm not holding a turn-off notice, maybe I'm being proactive, the 55-day hold doesn't go into effect. It actually only goes into effect if you have 14 days, right? So that 15-day hold doesn't go into effect until you have that 14 days. But they don't just automatically do that for you. So if I turn my OHEP application in a little bit before then, and it takes a long time for OHEP to process, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But if you're sitting there waiting for your OHEP application to be processed, you just don't get a hold. It's only if you turn it in and they see that you have a 14-day or less. So if you have 4 days left before your lights are shut off, they'll trigger the 55-day hold. But if I have 15 days left, they will not trigger that 55-day hold, and they won't just go back and keep checking for those people. It's only then. And like I said, you don't want to wait until then, because I was literally just talking to someone at OHEP a couple days ago, and they had a stack of papers of applications that people had turned in about a week ago, and they hadn't even looked at those papers. And so those have to be manually entered. So it's not just you drop it off and everything's great. It tends to be quite a long waiting period of people losing documents or not turning in proper documents. just as Commissioner O'Donnell had said, I have tried to fill out the OHAP application, and I challenge everybody to try. I cannot do it. I have a master's degree. I am a social worker. I tell people how to fill these things out. I do trainings. Often I try to do at least 20 trainings every 6 months with organizations on just how to collect documents for OHAP. So we say it's just a lease, it's just a this, it's just a that. But it's much more complicated, and I can't even remember all of it. There's literally a 200-page, actually it might be 300-page guidebook on just how to process a no application that's actually available online if you're ever really curious or bored. So that is out there. So with that kind of all said, and and one more thing, the online applications. People might not know this, and I think eventually, maybe one day, it will be great with categorical eligibility. As it stands right now, I can't remember the exact number, and I'm kicking myself for not looking it up before I came here, but it is over 80% of those applications that are put in online are denied. So it's not really a feasible thing for most people to do. And as we've stated, a lot of the OHAP offices are not open. So that could really account for why these arrearage numbers have gone up so much. There's no way to apply for help. So with all of that said, I'm actually going to start talking about what I kind of tried to prepare for today. So yeah, our office is going to be kind of advocating to keep the 12-month payment plan and that ability to put no money down to enter a payment plan. They're really important tools for customers to be able to access. They offer more reasonable options for a wider variety of people. I think that we need to start looking at this through a more equitable lens and think about our middle and income customers and what's actually feasible for them to do. And I'm going to show you some numbers in a bit to kind of back that up, because as it stands, we are literally leaving customers behind and in the dark. So the utility, in my experience, again, I know that everyone's talked about their payment plan offerings, but as someone who's been a social worker for 20 years, I hear about 3 to 4 months. That's what most people come to me and say, I was offered, a 4-month payment plan, whatever it might be. So the difference between really a 3-month and a 12-month payment plan in terms of revenue to the utility is really not that much kind of, in terms of the collection, but for that individual customer, that's a huge difference, and it has huge impacts on that person. What the commission currently has in place helps avoid some of those, what I kind of think is unreasonable payment plans, and provides that consistent customer experience. So you get a 12-month payment plan or whatever it is at every utility. It's not just the luck of the draw on what's going to be equitable for you. So low-income households, Black, Hispanic, Native Americans, renters, and older adult households, they all have disproportionately higher energy burdens than the national median average. And my office believes that we need to take another look at the arrearage payment options and maybe reimagine what that system is, to not only include the 12-month payment plans, maybe there's no money down, but also to include just options that are accessible to everyone. So many people are working on a really tight budget, and they can't afford a crisis. And I feel like during this pandemic, we've seen a lot of that. Once they get behind, they really need help catching up. So I kind of want to just, don't say it out loud, but think about what your paycheck is when what you bring home, like what that number is. And just kind of hold that as we go through what this process looks like. Because I think people really need to have a grasp on what people are literally bringing home. Because I don't know that everyone has a friend that is making 175% of the federal poverty level. United Way, this is nationwide actually, but they do them locally occasionally. And so the United Way in Maryland puts out an ALICE report, and you might know it. ALICE is supposed to be like a cute acronym for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. So I'm working, but the ends are not meeting, right? And it reviews it's quite a long report. It reviews economic factors specifically impacting Marylanders, and then it gives what they call a survival budget. So what will it take to survive in Maryland? They take a look at the average cost for this and that, and they kind of put it all together. What will that number look like? What I can say, because I read it before this, just in preparation, is that they talk about how there are more jobs, but they're majority low-wage jobs that are increasing across Maryland, and that 39% of the people that live in Maryland can't afford to live here. So I do want to bring up the chart. I guess I just click on this guy. You got it. I'll keep going. So I'm going to keep it real simple and just talk about like a one-person household. So for a one-person household to be able to pay everything they need, the Alice report says they need $33,000 a year-ish. And that comes out to be about $2,500 a month. And our updated Apprise report that we recently just put out, the average household receiving EUSP and MEEP through OHEP, that's about, so again, that's 175 of the federal poverty line. They're making $18,000. That's about $1,500 a month. So, okay, my eyes are terrible. I can't read that. I have a copy here. Oh, okay, yeah. I forgot that I was in charge of that. Let me see here. That is better. Thank you. So this is a little bit of a mix between, honestly, the Alice report, and I had to actually make this person have less income to match what we're seeing as our literal average income of a OHEP recipient. This is data from OHEP. So housing in Maryland, this is from the Alice report, about $1,100, but this is higher or lower depending on where you are, right? Food, they actually budgeted $292 for this in the Alice report. I put 0 just because I was trying to get somewhere near what these folks are dealing with. And just so you know, SNAP, the supplemental, again, supplemental being the key word here, should not be your main source of food. Supplemental nutrition assistance program, I want to say it's either at 135 or 133% of the poverty level. So that's actually lower than OHEP. Healthcare, let's just pray to God you don't get sick ever, and you get Medicaid. And again, Medicaid is lower than OHEP, so you're actually making less than this. Technology, again, I put 0. They actually had some money here for this. That's assuming that you enroll in the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is new, which is great. And it provides you a free phone and some mobile data. And like it's been mentioned before, I would love for you to try and apply to anything on your phone. And as Binga just recently put out a report about digital equity across the state, it's actually very neat. They have an interactive map where you can click on county, like smaller areas, and it tells you, okay, well, 80% of the people in this area have internet access, but 40% of them only have it on their mobile phone. So it's kind of interesting, and they just put it out. I should send that out to everyone. It's really interesting to look at. And then utilities. Well, this is from OHEP. So the average, this is from our Apprise report. The 219 is typically what someone who is eligible for OHEP is paying. After OHEP benefits, it's about 130. So we're at 1594. Now to your right, the OHEP guidelines to qualify for help for one person is 1982. So you can't make a penny over that. I literally just talked to someone who was $80 over, so they don't qualify. 1982, so you have some wiggle room. But if you look at even transportation, so I mean maybe if you live in the city, where I live, you can use the bus. But as someone who grew up in Calvert County and then Wacomico County, you need a car. And so this is insurance, this is gas, and then the average income of an OHEP customer, $1,523 per month, and then the cost of this survival budget we've sort of put together, $1,594. So you actually don't even have enough money. So this is very real. I'll just leave it at. So I think in recent years there's been a highlight of the wage discrepancy, but it's always been there, right? This has always been here. And I've personally spoken to thousands of these people because I've been here for a little over 2 years, but before this I had been at 211 Maryland for a decade and served as the director there. So I've had the privilege to speak to tons of people, literally thousands of people in these exact situations, trying to make these decisions. To give you some actual real-life examples of people I've spoken to very recently, and including one this morning, a grandmother who had taken her grandchildren because the father and mother left and just disappeared, and they're now struggling because she doesn't have any of their documents, so she can't sign up for any of the benefits. So what does she do? A two-parent family with 2 small children, one of which has severe asthma and needs those nebulizer treatments, and if they don't get it, they go to the hospital. Someone has to take off work of their hourly job, and then there's medical bills. A senior, and this one broke me, he called and said that he had to find money for his utility bill because his cat was dying, and he chose to take the cat to the ER because it was the only person he had in his life. And literally this morning before I got on the elevator and came down here, I got an email from a senior who was taking care of a terminally ill child who cannot see, cannot walk, and cannot hear, and they were disconnected yesterday. So these things are happening, and there are over 400,000 people in the state of Maryland that qualify for OHEP. Not even, so there's a lot of people working on a budget that looks some kind of version of this. And our recent, again, reprise report states that the average OHEP recipient has a 14% energy burden. And I think our normal culprits, right, like Baltimore City, PG, Montgomery, and Eastern Shore can sometimes have higher than that. So the 12-month no money down DPAs allows for one more flexible option, but this is where I'm going to start to advocate for that working group to kind of re-examine, reimagine, because we need to push further to reach all of our customers. Comar states that the utilities are to set up a reasonable payment plan. But again, what I experience, and I can't speak to the policies, but what I hear from these people, 3 to 4 months, something like that, and with a pretty huge portion down today. So if I was behind and they asked me, I could reach out to a family member, I could reach out to a friend, my savings, miscellaneous cutbacks. But for someone who's low income, if they're being asked for $400 today, it might as well be $4,000. It might as well be $4 million. It doesn't matter, because a lot of these folks are coming from generational poverty, and they don't have anybody to reach out to. There is no luxury of savings. There is no miscellaneous spending. So if your car breaks down and that's how you get to work, what do? What if you're the breadwinner and you go to the hospital and once again you're on hourly? Honestly, you could be fired in many cases, is what I've heard. If you're asked to put down $100 and you're in this situation, is that reasonable? So customers are in an uneven bargaining position. They don't know the system, and ultimately they're being told what DPA to, what will be accepted. So having a 12-month window helps to level the playing field and give, once again, like I mentioned earlier, consistency across the state. So it's not better if you live in one area versus another. Now, I know we've seen a lot of defaults, and I get it with these extended payment plans. But what these zero money down DPAs say to me is that people want to work with the utility. They are reaching out, they're asking for help, and they're trying what they can, but they can't work within the system that currently exists. It's not for them. They don't make the income that it would take. And that's why I'm going to say it again. We need to go back and look at these through an equitable lens and try and reach all customers, these at least 400,000 households, plus more that are the $80 over here and there, to reimagine the system. So again, the 12-month, the DPA, these are solutions. But if we were to re-examine the current standards for the DPA's negotiations, it would give us the opportunity to get consistency across the utilities and hopefully give people less of an uneven bargaining standpoint. People want to work with the utilities to keep their lights on. We see it through the numbers of DPAs. Why would they call? Again, I've talked to thousands of these people. But we need to look at repayment options through an equity lens and actually offer flexible solutions. So OPC recommends that these options stay in place and that a work group is formed to re-examine payment plans and negotiation standards.
Thank you very much, Ms. Nealon, and welcome
Thanks.
your first appearance at the commission. Before we turn to questions, do we have Fuel Fund with us today? We do, and you'll be speaking? Okay. Any other members of the public wish to speak today? Okay, thank you. We'll turn to questions. I'll be departing in just a moment, but rest assured I'll watch the Fuel Fund comments on the video. Questions from my colleagues, Commissioner Bubar?
Thank you very much, Ms. Nealon. David Lapp had recommended I come and meet you, and I have not been able to do that, so it's good to see you, but I'll come up and meet you in person. That was very, very compelling. Thank you. Can you clarify a little bit with doing the rulemaking? Is there additional data that you think is, I mean, you've given us some of that, but additional data that you think is necessary to collect that a rulemaking or work group process that would avail us to do that, to help?
I would echo what Mr. Hoover said. I think this is a kind of a weird opportunity to see what some of these things are already doing. And then I think there's also, in kind of preparation for this meeting, in case someone asks me, well, what do you think a reimagined, thing would look like? I don't have anything official to say on that, but we did reach out to some folks. And there are things out there that others are doing to kind of make sure that we're giving opportunity for people at all income levels, not just the people that are making these rules that probably could work within the framework that currently exists. So I think we should look to other states. I think we should look to advocate groups to get some ideas. But I think that, looking back to see what's been happening in this time frame where the current, the 30-day and the 12-month, all that has not been lifted is something I think that looking at that data would be helpful. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of, but I think, that's a great question.
And maybe this is for Mr. Hoover. Can you talk a little bit about if we adopt the recommendation to do a rulemaking, is your recommendation that the protections that are in place now remain until there is a final rule?
Yes. It's our view that, and again, I mean, the minimum timing we're thinking is maintain it through the winter heating season. And hopefully, this work group can be given an accelerated timetable. And I'm very cognizant of, the burdens of all the work groups, because trust me, we participate in those too. But, we view this as a special situation, and, we'd be willing to obviously do our part to make sure that this could be done. But we think that it could be accomplished within this time frame of the winter season. So if you maintain the restrictions in that period and then have the work group present the recommendations, we may be able to get all this lined up in the spring.
Okay, thank you. And my last thing is I'm going to appeal to Commissioner O'Donnell to go easy on Miss Nealon since she has a crutch.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So since Ms. Nealon gave us up to Calvert County, I'm just going to let it alone. And I was just kidding. So, Mr. Hoover, let me ask you this, though. You would acknowledge that we're not a social services agency, right?
Correct.
And what happens to arrearages ultimately?
Well, as I mentioned, ultimately they wind up in rate cases and get collected in rates. And so, yes, my customers help pay part of that. So we
all
as
do.
I said, we have skin
all
in the
do.
game. So.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah. And that's why when you hear me say, as much, notwithstanding the fact that I strongly agree with OPC's position in this instance, we can't let this go on forever. And I think you acknowledge that. Is that
absolutely
not right? Okay. I wanted to be clear on that because some people may, after listening to me today, think that I'm not in the camp of I expect people to pay their bills, because I do. I've always felt that way, and I have a strong ethic and inclination in that direction. So, but timing counts for something with me too.
And we agree with you on that part.
Okay. All right. So if I don't know what the commission will do, but ultimately, if we decide not to act on this at this point, OPC would acknowledge we have to do something eventually.
Sure.
I just wanted to get that kind of on the record. So, thank you for that, Mr. Hoover, and good job, Ms. Neal.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. So just a couple of questions. First, OPC is still suggesting that the termination notice period remain, or I guess would be moved back up to 45 days.
No, actually, we're perfectly comfortable with the 30 days.
Okay.
So we're as we mentioned, the changes that you made, the modifications you made in August in Order 90033, we think should stay in place. So 30 days, 12-month payment plan, and no deposits.
Okay, so the utilities are asking us to move to 14 days, and you've heard some of their arguments. One of them being that because the 30-day time frame crosses with billing cycles, it's resulting in customers' bills basically accumulating, and the turn-off notices aren't reaching in time, and they start the process over again. So tell me why we should not just return back to the COMAR process that we had prior to COVID.
I think this is a great example of why these need to be reexamined. Because, like I said, I know we want OHEP to work, but I've been working with OHEP for 20 years, and it's always looked like this. People go, and it takes forever to get through, and I think we just need to acknowledge that that's what's happening. Even though they're doing their best, people are turning in their stuff, and it's getting lost. They're having to go back multiple times. They can't get there. They're homebound. Like I said, I just talked to someone who had a stack of applications that were turned in last week that had not been touched. So even when people go and they do all the right things, it can still go terribly wrong. I just recently helped a woman who'd been trying to get her OHEP benefits applied for months, and for some reason, it just wasn't going through. She had a completed application. There's too many people involved, and so there's things that will happen. And so I think this is a great example of why it needs to be kind of looked at a second time.
And while it's being looked at, though, the utilities are telling us that because of the 30-day time frame overlapping with current bills, all of us are going to end up having to pay more when the utilities show up for a rate case to collect it. So you think it's appropriate to still stay at a 30-day time frame?
Yes, I do, and I think the concern is that and while there may be this disconnection between their systems and the rules you're putting in place, to give the customer literally just 2 weeks to sort of get their act together to pull this off, as she has mentioned, becomes pretty difficult. So I think that, pushing the burden on the customers, by shortening this time frame is not necessarily the equitable way to do it, even though it may cause them, more problems within their systems. Maybe there's some other way to come at this. And again, maybe this is something that this work group could look at. Is there a way to synchronize these gears so that you get, adequate notice time period for customers, but, can be cognizant of whatever the billing systems are of the utilities?
If I can add something to that, the legislature recently passed some rules for OHEP. Normally, when you turn in your application, you have about 30 days to cure your documents and get them all together. And I always tell people, I probably shouldn't put this on the record, but I constantly lose my Social Security card. So, and if I'm being evicted and all of my things are being thrown out, and I have children with me, or like the grandmother earlier who didn't have any documents, it takes time to get those documents together. And actually the legislature passed something that instead of 30 days, OHEP had to rearrange their entire system to now allow people 90 days, which actually went into the new fiscal year, which actually the utilities accommodated for and now can, figure out, that's fiscal year 21 and that's fiscal 22, because those grants can come in actually into the old grants come into the new fiscal year grants, because now they're having this new 90-day period and they need it. And that's why you'll see, in their numbers, not the ones that we submitted here, but in the overall, their application acceptance rates have gone up because people have more time to get these documents together.
Okay, so you also have been supporting the current status of 12 months for payment plans for customers. The utility companies have presented data, and we've both been around, Mr. Hoover and I, you've been around for a long time too. Utility companies have been presenting data showing that the 12-month plans have not been as successful, that they've had lots of defaults, and that those customers end up signing up for the plan, postponing the service denial for a couple of months, and then we're right back into the same situation again. So what they're asking for now is that we use the COMAR standard instead. Seeing as though the companies have produced all of this data suggesting that the 12-month plans aren't working, why isn't allowing them to go back to the old process the better approach? That would be better for all of our customers in terms of not letting all this show up in rate base.
Well, I'll take the first shot, and I do want Brandy to add to it. I think the data I saw actually looked at the longer plans were causing the problems, not necessarily the 12-month plans were causing the problem. And the concern we have is that, if you give maximum flexibility to the utility, as she mentioned earlier, there's this unequal bargaining position between the customer who's desperate to sort of keep their lights on and keep their essential services going, and the utility representative who quite honestly is looking to get, as much money as they can as soon as they can. And we think it's the equities are balanced when at least there's this, guarantee to the customer that, push comes to shove, you can get 12 months to pay this thing off. We're concerned that, without that sort of guarantee, the pressure is going to be on to do things that are much shorter and actually may wind up, even though we don't have the numbers in front of us, we can't predict that, you get these shorter plans that you're going to actually get the money you're talking about, even though it comes in a shorter time frame. Because if the resources aren't there, the resources aren't there.
I kind of pointed to this when I was talking earlier, but you have to think about who is, so those 3 and 4 month, which is those are the ones I typically see. A lot of times the folks I'm talking to can't enter them. They're not, so now you've opened up this area that was previously not accessible to a ton of people. And now those people are taking advantage of the only other option that they can to try and work with the utility. So I'm not surprised that there were a ton of defaults because they want to work with them, but this is the only thing that they can actually do because the down payment with like now add $300 on top of your regular bill every month. I mean, that's not real. And For them to be able to enter no money down and try and like come up with a solution. I don't think that the 12-month payment plan is the solution for everybody. I think we hear the word flexibility a lot and working with the customer. But again, I consistently hear the answer is this DPA. And I don't know. I wonder if there's another solution baked somewhere in there that other people are doing, because I think you're right. It's not sustainable to have just give everybody all the time and no money down. But it's because it's this new option that people could finally reach, and so they took it, and I don't blame them. And I think we need to find the other solutions in there.
Okay. So in terms of the search for those other solutions, you're proposing that the commission look at engaging a work group to look at all these issues. The utility companies have suggested this is not the right time. Having sat on it for a few work groups before, one of the things you've suggested, Mr. Hoover, is that this work group could actually come up with some solutions towards the end of the winter. Do you think that'll happen in 4 or 5 months?
Yes, I think it can be done that way. And again, if you give, specific directions to the work group as to, and it's maybe sort of limit the parameters, not just, have it open-ended and things like that. But, I think if there's directions from the commissions to the work group, and then we get all the people in the room and sort of, force people to sort of come to solutions, I think it can be done in that time frame.
It's very enthusiastic. I will grant you that. But I mean, it's who knows what happens, when folks have to sit and talk. Okay. Well, thank you for your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. Just quickly, most of the questions I think have been asked, but just so I understand the OPC recommendation on the work group. So, Mr. Hoover, would this be specifically just to, when you were talking about narrowing it, just to focus in on the 4 protections with regards to collections and terminations that were implemented during COVID, or do you see this expanding beyond that as far as just the to support rulemaking?
What we'd be willing to accept is this first option you discussed. So let's focus the work group on these particular, termination or policy modifications that you've adopted as part of COVID. And I think part of our thought has been, maybe these ideas should become permanent parts of the process. And so if you limit it to those, we're perfectly content with doing that. I think when we originally talked about this work group, it was maybe it's time to actually look at the termination regs in general. Now, that may be a pretty broad prescription and actually take more time. So if we're very focused on the time constraints, which is not an unreasonable situation, I think narrowing the focus on this is probably a productive use of our time.
Okay. But also I've heard from Ms. Neal and you both can respond that this ought to be looked at and, more broadly, that we ought to be considering energy burden through and we should look at collections as just, I think he said through that lens, and so there may be more to this. So would this be the work group, or are there other forms going on? Because it seems that some of these broader solutions may require the involvement of other stakeholders that may not just look at this particular regulation, but and OHAP and all the stakeholders might be required. So I mean, would that also, if we were to go that direction, be able then to also look at the collections and terminations policies? In other words, looking at it
obviously,
broadly.
The energy burden issue has been something that we've been sort of, wrestling with for a number of years, and we've thought about the opportunity to present this to the commission and possibly the legislature as how to sort of deal with this issue. I think, given where we're sitting today, maybe, examining these broader issues may be something that could be, potentially looked at, but not necessarily, expecting this work group to come to any conclusions on that. But maybe you can start the process of making a recommendation, a part of that, to say, look, further steps should be, this regarding the energy burden issue.
Okay, Ms. Neely, do you have a view on that?
Would
I
it be
defer
in
to-
the work group that we're talking about specifically for the regulations, or is this something that needs to be?
I think the hope would be to have something more broad, but if we're talking about getting this done before winter, having like a prescriptive, maybe taking a look at what's, currently at stake here, makes sense. But with, like Fred said, or Mr. Hooper, sorry, have a more general recommendation about the end, like this needs to be looked at a broader scale. It's 2022 and we need to be looking at things equitably.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, there's then 2 tracks.
Sure.
I think, I think if we're going to have that time frame, right? If we want this done by the end of winter, I've also been a part of a work group, and as Commissioner Linton said, it's very enthusiastic to imagine we have reimagined the entire collection termination system in a couple of months. But I think the hope would be that it should be taken. We should take a look at it. Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think reimagination in just 2 months is kind of ambitious.
Yeah.
Might be ambitious.
Great. Commissioner, any more questions?
Just
Commissioner O'Donnell.
to follow up, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make sure I understand, maybe my word, phase 2 of this, because this can be very expensive. You start talking about a LIHEAP, you start talking about EUSP, you start talking about the very non-controversial subject of arrearage management plans. Oh my God, this could go off the rails and take a lot of resources. And although I'm sympathetic to the argument that maybe it needs to be looked at, I'm not sure what the form of that is. So let me, because phase 2, a comprehensive look, you're talking about something much more expensive.
I agree.
With a lot more stakeholders and a lot more implications and a lot more policy decisions. So let me make sure I understand what this is. OPC's request is to address the specifics, full stop, period, full stop.
On this one, yeah.
On this one.
Yeah.
Okay. I just needed to
Yeah, I
clarify
understand.
that.
And
'cause-
again, it's sort of, and I'm cognizant of, what I've heard earlier today about, the need to sort of get back to, right size, the process and things like that. So, at this point, we're willing to sort of deal with the issues that have been come out of COVID. And
Look, a rulemaking's not going to occur before spring.
Right. I agree.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just want to make sure I reset everybody's expectations. Not going to happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Bubar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nealon, could you provide some clarification on something you said where 80% of the applications are denied? Can you just clarify that?
It's actually above that. So, but I can't remember the exact number. So when you go online and apply through the MD Think portal, we work very closely with OHEP, and we've seen the numbers, and over 80% of the people that go online and apply are either denied because that time frame has passed, or they've just sort of stopped engaging. So 80% of the people that go online and apply do not get the assistance.
Okay, so it's process issues that cause them to get denied.
Yep, and it's a lot of documents. The documents typically tend to be the problem.
Okay, thank you. And just one last question. Are you aware of any other jurisdictions on the suggestion to, do a rulemaking, gather information? Are you aware of any other jurisdictions that have a better process or new ideas?
Off the top of my head, nobody comes to mind. I mean, I suspect the usual suspects, Massachusetts, New York, and are states to sort of look at this. But I don't have one at mind at this point I would point to and say, hey, let's just copy what they do. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. If there are no other questions, we'll thank this panel. Thank you, staff. Thank you, OPC. And we'll invite, members of the public, but I understand we have Fuel Fund representative, if you'd like to come forward. Well, welcome, and thank you for
Afternoon.
being here today. Yes, I guess it is afternoon now.
The things we do to get out of the office.
Right. If you, as you've heard, if you could go ahead and enter an appearance.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Debbie Brown with the Fuel Fund of Maryland, and I have brought along with me today Kenyatta Stark, who manages one of our newly created programs, the Silver Lights program, which is dedicated to the seniors as well as critical medical needs clients that we have at the Fuel Fund. just really honored and thrilled to be here today. We definitely are in favor of motion 2 in the 30-day. I mean, that is something with Kenny and the other 2 members of the utility assistance team that we recommended and came up with. Just from what we're seeing, as we like to say in our world now, pre-COVID fuel fund and post-COVID, or the endemic that we're in with COVID-19, the total face of our clients at the fuel fund have changed since March 2020. I have lots of data that I can tell you about, but one of the things that I just want to remind everybody, the fuel fund, as a nonprofit, we do not receive any federal, state, city, county funds. Everything that we distribute out is through the generosity of our individual donors, foundations, business community, along with the long-standing matching credit program that we use with BG&E. Just some quick things. We were writing down notes as we went through, and comments and questions that came. One of the 3 reasons that we're definitely in support of keeping the 30 days is the balances are just so high for our clients at this point. The influx of first-time clients navigating utility assistance is 25%. So we're seeing 25% new faces, and with that new client, they're eligible for OHEP, but they now have no idea how to get through the process or manage the process. It's long, it's cumbersome, it can be days, it can be weeks that we're seeing it. And as Ms. Nealon noted, we're seeing many of the clients with missing forms for application and really not getting the follow-up that they need, so they come to us. And if we do see a client with a turn-off notice, and their power is off, and that's what we're seeing right now, is in the last 4 months, the 1,800 households that we've helped, 50% of them have had no power. The other 25% have received a turn-off notice. So we're really seeing them struggling to collect documentation. Seniors continue to struggle with the digital divide. OHEP offices still have limited hours. Kenny can tell you a little bit more about that, but they're not fully open, and seniors want to be seen in person. So again, we're here to answer any questions. We'll be complete, honest, transparent with you. If I don't know the answer, I'll defer it over to Kenny, who is doing this 365, 24/7, and will not have Veterans Day off because of the influx of applications that we have right now. So thank you.
Great. Well, again, we thank you for being here and providing this important information and perspective. Maybe I just invite you at this point. You've heard the utilities argument for why we should go back to the 14-day, and I would probably just summarize it in they believe that this is a quicker way of helping customers seek help. And also there's the difficulties with the timing of the billing. So you've heard the utilities. Why don't you provide your perspective on that?
With us, again, with that 30 days, it's that slow. We realize things need to go back to normal, but it's more of getting that timing down. As Ms. Nealon mentioned, as we've heard, we've got to take that time to re-educate the 25% of new clients facing energy assistance for the first time, as well as our traditional clients that used to come to us. Although we stayed in touch with these clients throughout the pandemic, every 3 months we e-blasted our 20,000 clients, past and present. We told them proactive steps to do, but it was still just difficult for them, challenging living paycheck to paycheck. So really we need to take this time to continue to educate the new faces as well as the original faces to this program. Kenny, do you have?
That is also correct. I mean, OHEP hours for the Baltimore City area, for them to receive an application, their hours are from 9 to 11. They take a break and then they open back up from 1 to 3. And so when you have so many customers who need assistance, that's not a great open window time for numerous people to apply. Just this morning we had an 80-year-old client with a 10-year-old in the home who had multiple, issues. And they put an application early October. It wasn't until we made the contact with the OHEP department to get this 80-year-old restored. all of her documentation had been sent. She did everything that she needed to do, and her services were still disconnected.
Great, thank you. So again, in short, you believe the 30 days is necessary to accommodate the customers who need this assistance?
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll turn to my colleagues. Commissioner O'Donnell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Brown, I wanted to ask you about the quasi-endowment fund at the Fuel Fund of Maryland. How's it doing?
It took a little bit of a hit once we hit that new goal that I lost my words, that we hit the predetermined amount again of that $5 million. We even went above, but with the recent turbulent economy, it's dropped a little bit below in that time. Yeah, we got there and we saw it for a little bit.
So the commitment still exists to restore it to its
Absolutely.
minimum corpus of $5 million?
Absolutely, and we are doing some, with the investment committee, we're doing some reinvestments and staying positive, but realize it's like a marathon in this case. But we were glad. We got up to about 5.3 million before it took a hit. It's around 4.7 right now.
The temptation is going to be there to spend that money now in these trying times, but that will force the Fuel Fund of Maryland to come back before us again.
Yep.
In what I found to be not the most pleasant proceeding in the world. So I hope that doesn't happen. And I appreciate the work you do and everything that Fuel Fund of Maryland does to help people who need help. But please don't use that corpus of that quasi-endowment fund.
Absolutely not. We have a strong investment committee and board oversight. We're in the right direction.
Thank you.
I'll turn next to my left, Commissioner Linton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I echo the comments of Commissioner O'Donnell. Certainly, the fuel funds, are both yours and the one in Washington, are extremely important, and they're a great supplement for all of the consumers out there who need the assistance. So you heard the utilities today say that they are conducting very proactive outreach. They are reaching out to consumers when they contact them, and even in advance of that, to try and get them to manage their bill faster. So I guess, are you seeing the results of that, and are you partnering with them to make sure that consumers that need that assistance or need that information are getting it?
Definitely during this time with COVID, I think our communications and relationship with all of our partners has gotten stronger, and we have definitely been working with BG&E. They will send over messaging to us and ask for assistance on how to do wording and to get things out of that nature. So we definitely are working along with them to help the target audience.
And so, amongst the other members of the assistance network, as I'll just reference it, is that what are you hearing from them? Are they also figuring out new ways to, I guess, reestablish themselves post-pandemic?
I think they're looking for ways. I think everybody is struggling with finite funding, similar to us. Many of the other partners that we use and we give to our clients to go pound the pavement to look for funds that they need to come up with their portion to pay. We've noticed just in the last couple months, they're struggling. They could go to XYZ church or XYZ community center, and maybe before they could have given out money for utility assistance, they're struggling now. So we're definitely seeing that. I had a gentleman yesterday, a veteran, who spent the last 7 days going through all of our resources that we gave, and he came back with $600, and it was 3 locations, $200 each. Normally, he could have taken that community resource guide, and he could have gotten the $1,500 that he needed. He came back with $600. So they're definitely struggling. We've also, with our clients now, within our CRM, when we're talking to a client, we're taking an application, we're digging down an extra layer to the original data that we collect, and we're now looking what other human services could they need help with. And the top 3 that we're seeing besides utility assistance is housing, clothing, food, and financial help. And it's really interesting to see because we realize that if they're coming to us, they're struggling with other things as well. So to grab that data has been helpful for us as we go to look for additional foundation and business support. And it's helped us create some partnerships. We're now working with the Maryland Food Bank, that an individual there that's having food insecurity, they're going to be screened. And if they're showing struggles with energy assistance, an application is started right with them.
Okay, so, of course, we're here today because utility companies have sought a return to the processes that existed prior to the COVID and the emergency orders that the Commission issued. And they've laid some compelling reasons why. I mean, as you've heard from this bench, at some point, we're going to have to do that. So, at some point in the future, when that happens, obviously we need the assistance network to be ready. So, I guess in some respects, you're kind of representing all of the assistance network now, so congratulations. But in the room, you have a number of utility companies that will probably have to think about interacting with consumers a little differently post-pandemic, just like you have to, and even we have to. So what do you think, what would you say now that the utility companies can take back to their companies to say that the assistance network is saying that these are the kind of things we need to start returning back to normal? Because from what your filing suggested, we're not ready yet. So how do we get ready? What do we need?
Kenny, I'll go first and then see, because you're hearing it every day. I mean, it's the constant communication and adapting to their form of communication. That's why we created the Silver Lights program. Kenny is a party of one, and she handled herself almost 1,800 senior households last year because we met their mode of communication. If that meant snail mail, we snail mailed. If that meant picking up the phone, we picked up the phone. So that program, so where I'm saying meet the mode of communication.
I just wanted you to clarify, meet the mode of communication. So you're talking about mail, email, that type of communication.
Whatever it might be, yes. Because again, a certain population is going to respond one way or the other way. And I think a lot of the other too, and Kenny can speak on that, is trust. The community trusts the fuel fund. And that's why they call us. When they're struggling, they will actually start a conversation with, I know I'm not supposed to start with you, or I know you can't help me, but I know you're going to answer the phone and you're going to tell me what to do. Kenny hears that constantly. Kenny?
Yes. Just trying to get in touch with anyone over at the OHEP office is almost impossible. People are on hold for hours at a time. The lines are dropping when they are on the phone, on hold for 2 and 3 hours. So they do call the fuel fund and they're trying to gather as much information because they know that someone is going to answer the phone. Our call center is now Monday and Friday, so we're always constantly answering the phone. Like as soon as you hang up from one client, there's another one calling and they're asking an array of questions.
Okay. All right. Well, you may get more questions, not from me, but from some of the people in the audience, because like I said, at some point we do have to return to the business as usual, as however we'd like to define that. And we need our assistance network to be ready because customers out there are still going to need your help. And everything looks different, as you've already said. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Linton. Commissioner Bubar.
Thank you. Just to, have you changed your modes of communication? I think you might have answered this through some of your questions, but is reaching you through phone the main way that people get in touch with the fuel fund?
I still think it's the most comfortable or the most confident that people feel, even though we've had to adjust it because of the volume and the staff size that we have. But we'll meet the client whatever is their mode of communication.
In person?
We don't have set walk-in hours, but we do get it because people get frustrated with the process and show up. So we do not turn anybody away when they come to our door.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bubar. Well, thank you very much for your participation today and being here. At this point, do we have anyone else that wishes to be heard at this public conference? Seeing none, and do we have any final statements at all from commissioners? Hearing none, well, we've really appreciate everyone participating. We've been given a lot to think about and to consider. I know that very soon we'll be deliberating on this and expect to have an order out soon. So again, thank you very much.